Good afternoon, everyone. Give me just a couple seconds here. I'm just getting all the screens laid out here. I am Mike Messino. I work for Madison College in Wisconsin, and we're one of the partners with John in Cassia. And we do a lot of these seminars and classes with them. I'm going to be covering a few of the modules today. I'll be covering the accountant auditing, incident response, and media protection this afternoon. Oops, there's one more. Hold on. Let's get this out of the way. And also the security assessment part of what we're going over today. Let's just close up these modules here. All right, and for auditing and accounting is what we're looking at right here. And I'm just going to fire up the thing quick. And all right, any after lunch questions here? I'm assuming that you guys are in a different time zone, so we just finished up lunch. Any questions before we get rolling on this afternoon stuff? All right, and I'm gonna just open up the chat client here, make sure that I've got that open so I catch anything. There we go. All right, so what we are going to be taking a look at now is auditing, doing an audit and accountability of what we're required to keep for records, as as in logins, logouts, who has touched and accessed which resources on in the infrastructure, times, how many times they connected up, the times and date stamps of when that happened, and then to be able to line that up with exactly who was supposed to have access to that and when. So if we dig in a little bit, of course, this has been updated a little bit from the CMMC 1 version up to 2, and we've basically narrowed it down to 3 layers now instead. All right, this is just kind of a review of what you guys have talked about earlier. All right, so where this thing mostly lives, as far as the auditing and accountability, you can see is right here. So a lot of this is in the upper layers when we're keeping track of since we're actually monitoring and reacting to things. So to create and retain system audit logs and records to the extent needed to enable the monitoring and analysis, investigation, and reporting of any unlawful or authorized system activity. All right, this can include, you'll notice that there's audit logs this would include login times, login locations, the account that was used to log in, all of that kind of information. Along with that now, so this keeps track of of basically that kind of information. And down here, we also want to make sure that along with the actual, when the actual access token was generated and given to the user, we also want to make sure that we can tell everywhere where that access token was used within the organization. So in other words, if that particular user goes in and accesses something they're not supposed to, that would be a red flag. That would be something that we want to make sure that we have visibility into. Now down here under the event review, we want to make sure that somebody is reviewing and updating the logged events, that somebody's actually monitoring and paying attention to these two things. And we want to make sure that there's a failure if there's any kind of if logging stops, or if we are not getting up-to-date logs, or if we're missing pieces. So this entire thing is kind of an iterative cycle. So the CMMC defines what we are required to keep an eye on, but these same records are also used for things like for intrusion detection, incident response, and stuff like that. All right. So what exactly is the objective? What are we checking to see if they're doing? We want to make sure that certain required system logs are being maintained to the extent that they need to be. Now, one of the problems that you can run into here is that you're not keeping them long enough, or you're not keeping all of the required logs that are needed, or that kind of thing. So that's what we're auditing for here. We're making sure that the organization is able to provide log records that allows us to track them through the organization, and to satisfy what's legally required for doing that. So our objective, all right. We want to make sure that they are keeping the required logs. I think the easiest way to think about these things, honestly, is like, so since we work for a school, we are required to keep email records and certain logs as far as the activities of the people who work for the organization for up to 7 years for reference. All right, so that would be something we'd be checking for. We'd want to number one have to make sure that that the organization did have those particular logs on hand, and that they were available to the extent that they needed to be. All right, we want to make sure that the content of them are sufficient for being able to, indicate whether or not somebody has done something, or something unlawful or unauthorized. So we want to be able to look in the logs and then make a determination. Gee, can I actually get the information I need out of this? You want to make sure they're getting generated. Oops, go back. Can I do this? Oh man, hang on. This thing has just. I'm gonna have to. That's right. Yeah, there we go. So we want to make sure that once they're created, they've got exactly the content that we need. We want to make sure that the retention's there for the amount of time that we do require them. And we want to make sure that if we, let's say that, like, for our 7-year policy, needless to say, we can't keep all those records auditable for 7 years right up front. What we can do is we can take the records, we can compress them and have them available. All right, so that's kind of that's the idea there. That's what we're actually looking for. So what is acceptable evidence that this is being followed, that we are able to, monitor for all that? Well, number one, we can look at what the policy is. So what exactly is the defined policy that the organization is using for this, and does that policy, line up with what the requirements are? We want to look at the procedures that are used for auditable events. How are we collecting those? Are we sending them to a central location? Are we compressing them and storing them as backups? How are we maintaining those logs? Is there actually, do we actually need to treat it like other backed up data so that we can recover and view it later? All of those things are things that we want to look at the documentation of how the organization is handling it. What is the system security plan? That is usually going to be able to define how some of these records are collected. All right, or what needs to be collected is going to be defined in the security plan for what we're looking for. The design documentation is probably going to contain what the methodologies are. For example, are we taking all of those logs, forward them to a central log server, and then do we have scripts or pattern matching in place to pull the given information out that we're looking for? Along with our design documents, the actual configuration and setup. Is everything working the way that it's documented? Do they actually have a design intent here? Did they follow through with it? what are the step-by-step procedures, the written laid out procedures in the policy for controlling those records? What are the procedures for generating those records? All right. Is it well defined in the documentation? Then, of course, we can look at the actual system audit logs and records and look at the auditable events. We can take a sampling of it and then define whether or not what they've got will get us the information or not. We can actually look at current system incident reports and see, okay, so do we have adequate visibility here? Do we have enough to cover what we're looking for? All right, and of course, as always, other documents as required fall into this category. So, with this, this kind of goes hand in hand again with incident response, because this is how we're keeping track of who's doing what, when, and how, and to what. All right. So then when on the flip side of this is in the incident response, when we see something, when we find something that we have to react to, having all of this information available is how we can figure out, the who part of the whole situation. All right. So interviews, who can we talk to? All right. Well, of course, personnel that do auditing and accountability for it, that handle the actual responsibilities of doing that. Also, people with information security responsibilities. The reason why is because they are probably going to be the ones who are doing the day-to-day working with those records. All right. We see an incident. We're probably going to go in and take a look and run an audit on the who was logged in at that particular time and track it back. So if you look here, personnel with audit and accountability responsibilities, this may be sysadmins who keep an eye on this, right? Or could be, part of the security's responsibilities. Down here, this is more, so this is like keeping track of the logins on a person basis. The information security part is probably referencing it back again from incident response so that, they have that viewpoint of it. Now down here, the audit review and analysis reporting, these guys are going to have an isolated view on, pulling kind of a big picture out of it and what we can actually, what overall view of the whole situation can be derived. All right. So we also want to interview anyone with any responsibilities involved in this. And then down here, the system or network administrators are always important because they're the ones who are configuring it. They're the ones who will be able to tell you, okay, so this is working, or maybe we have a bottleneck and we can't get all this data up to the central server. They're the ones who will be able to give you information on whether or not the actual physical implementation is working or not. All right. So how do we evaluate and test it? Well, we can generate a known event or something like that, or we can simply have test user accounts and try logging them in from different locations, and then try accessing resources that user both has access to and that user does not have access to, and see if we have the visibility. Is the mechanisms that we have in place for keeping track of this, can we actually audit a sample user? All right, so the next one here, 2.041, make sure that the actions of an individual user can be uniquely traced back to those users. So again, with this, what we're looking for is when a user logs in Windows, for example, they are issued a session token that they then carry around, and they, everything they touch has that session token associated with it. Well, we want to know whether or not we've got the visibility to be able to query our log records and figure out, hey, this particular user is the one who did this particular activity. All right, so that the ability to correlate that is what we're looking for here. Is there record keeping set up? Is there logging set up so that we can get that kind of visibility? All right. You can see here the content of the audit records need to support the ability to uniquely trace users to their actions. All right. And also we want to audit the records to make sure that once they're created, they have the content that we're actually looking for. Give me just a second here. I want to see if I can pull up a example here. Oops, hang on, launched the wrong thing. No, sorry. I thought I could give an easy example. I'm looking there. It's a little more complex than I wanted to go with this. All right. So anyway, just taking a look at if whether or not your audit records give you the ability to be able to get at that. All right. So what would we consider acceptable evidence that they are that they do have the visibility they need for this? All right. Well, we can look at the policy and see if they've thought it through and have defined that type of data needs to be captured. What procedures do they have in place as far as capturing those records? Sometimes you have to enable additional logging to make that possible. Some of this stuff you can't see with the default logs. You have to actually set up your logging so that it adds extra fields and stuff like that. We would want to make sure that that those procedures are in place for setting it up so that happens. All right, system security plan, design documentation, and the configuration and settings. Again, all of this is going to probably define whether or not you've got it set up so that it can get that kind of visibility into those users. All right, we're going to want to look in all of the procedures for setting that up to see whether or not those records are being collected and maintained the way they're supposed to. All right, and then as we go down the list here, it really we're looking for. Now notice we've got a few more things in here, and the reason why is because we want to make sure that we can use those records for extracting data from an incident response. So should something come up, and at this point where we're tracking an event back to a user, this probably means that something happened. Let's do a simple event. We don't necessarily need to be an attack. All right. Let's say, for example, that we have a directory that's shared out on the local network, and only people that are from the finance department are supposed to be going in there and looking around. All right. So let's say somebody from the shipping department or something just sees a share out there and decides just to go in there and click around and start looking around at stuff, things like that. All right. Well, that's against the policy. That's not what they're supposed to be doing, and we are supposed to have visibility into being able to detect that kind of thing. So what happens? Well, that's going to trigger some type of an event. Probably somebody's not supposed to be in the directory wandering around. So when it does, what we want to be able to do is, with this is we want to have enough visibility where we can go, okay, so what did they do? Is this a case where somebody double clicked on the share, went in, saw a bunch of stuff they didn't recognize and left? Or is this a case where they went in and they started prodding around and looking, trying to get into all kinds of different files and doing this? That's what we're talking about here. We want to see whether or not our incident reports and system events and the audit logs are in depth enough where we can differentiate between those two different things. All right, so that's kind of the idea here. That's why these documents are relevant to this particular situation. All right, as far as our interviews, of course, we're going to, people with auditing and accountability responsibilities, we're going to ask, are you getting what you need? Once again, the people with information security responsibilities or system or network administrators. These guys are going to tell us whether or not how we got it set up is working the way it's supposed to or not. And of course, the security personnel are going to be using these exact logs and records on a day-to-day basis to try to, this is the bread and butter. This is how they're detecting and interacting with things. All right, how do we test it to assure that it is following? Once again, in this particular case, we're going to log in and we are going to go ahead and, prod around on things. Let's set off some alarms. Let's see whether or not they have the visibility to be able to tell what I'm doing. All right. Next, we're going to take a look at the procedures for reviewing an event. All right. Now, the first two are covering, okay, who logged in, when, and, from where and all of that. The second one that we just looked at was, can I take that, that user and can I tie a specific user to the specific event? All right. One of them is, just looking at the user themselves. I'm focusing in on a given user doing a given thing. The other is kind of the other direction. I've got an event. Can I figure out who did this thing? All right. Now, as far as the event review goes, all right, we want to review and update the logged events. This one, I want to make sure that that what I am getting is what I need to be seeing. And this is an iterative process. So, a piece of this is ensuring that you actually have a life cycle where we are, we're going, okay, hey, I'm looking at the logs. I've got this. Do I have a blind spot? Is there something that maybe would be good, here that I should be able to see? That's the idea here. We want to review and then be able to, loop our results back in. And notice that's at the next level up here at level 3. All right. So we need a process to determine when to review logs event. A process for determining when to review logs events is defined. We want to make sure that, it's defined how they're going to, the times and when they're going to do it. Make sure that, that everything that's being logged is defined in the review process, and make sure that the event types we're looking for are updated based on that review. And again, remember this: what we're doing is we're sifting for blind spots here. Evidence is kind of the policy is always going to be the first place we start looking to see if it's defined. All right. Procedures for addressing the audit records and events types. What's the procedure for requesting something added to it? The other thing too is theoretically in this process, you could have things that you want hidden too, unnecessary information that would make it easier to work with if we didn't have that in there. All right, we want to look at the system security plan, list of organization, defined event types to be logged. What are we looking for? We cannot log all events. And actually, this is kind of interesting. We do this. We actually set this up in one of my advanced security classes. And one of the inevitable things, it's audit object access auditing. And one of the inevitable things that students do, and I do not warn them about this, I let the ones who are creative do it and try it. One of the inevitable things that they will do is they will switch on object event logging, and then they will audit the whole C drive. All right. It's a complete disaster. It's all useless because it's way too much information. All right. And all that. And that's the idea here. We want to see what the list of organizational defined event types are that we want logged. And then we want to review that on a regular basis. Are we logging things we don't need? Are we missing a whole bunch of stuff that we do need? All right. And as the threat landscape changes, we need to change too. We need to update it so that we get visibility into new things and maybe roll stuff out that's not as necessary anymore. All right. So more documentation. We want to, of course, look at the system logs and records. We want to look at the incident reports. Once again, these two things right here are going to correlate to kind of tell you whether or not you're seeing what you need to see, what you have the visibility that you need. All right, people we need to check in with and interview. Anybody who's got auditing and accountability responsibilities, and then of course, because they're the ones who are actually doing the updates and making the changes. But of course, the information security professionals who are responsible for that. The reason why is because it's their data, right? They're the ones who are defining, gee, I have the visibility I need or I don't. So really, that's really where that comes down to, as a lot of the actual, are we getting what we need comes down to this. And how do we evaluate and test it? All right. Well, we want to check the mechanisms that are supporting the review and update of the logging event types. What we want to look for is we want to look for whether or not it's stale. We want to look for repetition. So in other words, if we have let's say we have a big company-wide event or something like that. Well, is there, did this process take place? Did we go in there and go, man, how did these guys get embedded into the company like this? Did we go back and review why we didn't have the visibility to catch this earlier? That sort of thing. All right. So we can basically go back and look at the mechanisms that are actually supporting that review process. What triggers the review and stuff like that. All right. And our last one here, and again, this is at the 3 level. Our last one here is failure alerting. We need to know really quickly if we are failing to get to log the information that we need. So what's the objective? We want to know, we want to make sure that everything in the chain, somebody's monitoring whether or not the logging is working. Now, if the logs are being monitored properly, we should notice this right away. All right. If you're working in the incident response center and all of a sudden you got no data or you're missing data, you have a sudden blind spot someplace, that should be a big red flag relatively quickly. All right. We want to make sure that that the people who are supposed to be alerted to that are being alerted right away. All right. We want to make sure that we can figure out what types of what's failing. All right. Which alert will be generated if that's defined. So is there a log artifact that we can actually use to tell whether or not our event tracking is going wrong? And we need to identify the personnels that are alerted in an event, and we need to know what their process is for getting us back online. How fast can they actually turn this around and get it in, and get things fixed? Right? What is acceptable evidence? Well, of course, we're going to check our policy. All right. This one's huge in this one. So procedures for addressing the response to a logging failure. All right, this had better be well documented, exactly how you're going to react and how you're going to get back up to speed as fast as possible. All right, this is really, this is really, I don't want to say disaster recovery, because this is more of triage. This is how are you going to get back up and running as fast as possible. All right, and this better be defined. This better be documented someplace as far as this goes. We want to see what our system configuration settings and associated documentation are, and who's the list of personnel that are notified, in what order, and what are they going to do. Again, this one has a really heavy weight in this because it is time sensitive. You have to get the logging back online as fast as possible. As long as the logging is down, you do not have accountability because you're not able to keep track of who's doing what, and we can't tie any given event to anything. So that's kind of bad. So we can look in system incident reports, system audit logs and records. Basically, you know, of course, losing logging is going to be an incident. Not, you know, these aren't you know, this is kind of just defining the incident, but the stuff up here is the most important. The fact that we can react quickly, that we have a plan for reacting quickly, and we know exactly who's supposed to do what. With the system incident reports, we can do like kinds of some lesson learned at this point, but you know, we can now, the main stuff's going to happen up here. All right, so who do we interview with this? Of course, the audit and accountability responsibility, there's always going to be that person. So personnel with information security responsibilities, because they're the ones who are going to get blinded by the loss of logging. All right, the system and network administrators, they are likely the ones who are going to set it right when it's not working. Now, system developers is an interesting one in this particular case. All right. So the system developers are in there because the system developers are the ones who are building in logging functionality into any, you know, custom type systems that we've got on there. So we may have to interview and talk to them to make sure that you know, how do we get your system back up and logging if it goes down? Are there specific instructions? Are there specific ways that we're going to be doing that? And how do we test this? All right. We basically just want to, you know, run through an audit of the mechanisms, you know, that we're gonna use to detect the failures, the logging failure. This one, I don't know that we would necessarily want to. We might have an isolated section where we could have mock logging coming in. And then maybe, you know, shut down that section that we don't actually care about the data. We certainly are not going to take hopefully one of our systems that we're actually logging offline. But we could pretty easily take down a mock one and see what happens for that kind of thing. All right. All right. Now here is some of our own. Here's some other sections on this thing. So notice our level 2 here, 3.35 audit correlation. Sorry, I got a little bit of a sore throat today, so I'm kind of working at it here. So we're correlating our audit record reviews and analysis, for the reporting process for investigating and responding to indications of unauthorized, suspicious or unusual activity. We're going to provide an audit record, reducing down the report and kind of summarizing it. And actually, I'm just going to pop in here. Instead of listing these, we should have these each in here separately. All right, so audit correlation. There you go. So we want to audit record, review and analysis of the reporting process. Hang on, this one threw me here for a second. I'm sorry. We're correlating the process for the investigations and the response. So I'm sorry. We're just tying this particular slide threw me here for a second. So we're correlating the actual audit process with the response. All right. So we want to basically have a defined audit record review analysis and reporting process, and correlate that to the actual events and see whether or not our plan is actually yielding the results we want to in the reports. All right. Basically, our evidence is basically the usual stuff: the accounting policy, the security plan. All right. Now, in this particular one, we are going to care about most heavily this. Procedures for addressing investigation and response to suspicious activities. All right. We are trying to make sure that this correlates with what our goals are. All right. And system audit logs and records across different repositories. If we don't have everything centralized, we also want to audit for this and make sure that this is lining up with what we're looking for. All right, the people we're going to interview, as always, the people with the audit record review and analysis and reporting responsibilities, and also security. All right, these guys are going to be doing the audit to make sure that policy is lining up with what we're doing, and these guys are going to basically be able to say yes or no, what we're doing is working, and maybe have these guys wrap it back in and make fixes. All right, evaluating and testing. We're just going to test the mechanisms that are supporting that process. All right, now, taking down any, being able to reduce the records down to something usable is what our goal is here. All right, so in other words, I want to be able to go in and do an on-demand analysis of, whether or not our auditing is doing what it's supposed to. So can the thing be reduced to something usable rapidly? Can we reference back to it and use it? All right, what is our acceptable evidence here? The same thing as the other ones are here. This kind of falls into a similar category. All right, again, the people who are actually doing the reduction report and the personnel with the security responsibilities are the two are going to be the main interviewers here. All right, how do we test it? Well, we, check whether or not it's effective or not. All right, this one's a pretty straightforward, easy one. So we want to make sure that we have an authoritative time source. Everything has to be synchronized. Your logging is not a lot of good if clock synchronization is off. So that now you'll notice we want to make sure that this is really what we're talking about here is network time protocol. All right, so we want to make sure that everybody is referencing a similar time server. Sometimes in like Active Directory, it'll be the domain controller we'll be syncing up against. So if we're working on internet-facing DMZ machines, a lot of times we'll have them all pointed to the same external server, or possibly even we're running our own NTP server, on the perimeter device. That server syncs up to a master time server. But anyway, we want to make sure that we've got that we've got one of those going. So we want to make sure that internal system clocks are used to generate timestamps for audit records. All right, remember, it's important that they're synchronized. So we really want to have one source that we're syncing up against. All right, we want to have an authoritative source with which to compare the internal clocks. All right, and internal system clocks used to generate timestamps are synchronized with the specified authoritative time server. We just need to make sure that this whole thing is going on. You want to remember, this is all logged information. The entire synchronization process, how often, when it fails, all of that stuff is logged. All right, so what's our acceptable evidence? Well, better be in the audit, in the policy that says we are going to have a centralized time server. What are our procedures for timestamp generation? Well, we're probably using NTP very likely. All right. System design documentation and the security plan. So the design documentation is obviously going to have defined where this machine is, or what, where we're syncing up against. The configuration and settings and associated documentation. This part is obviously going to define how we've set it up. All right. Now here, this part is kind of really important for what we're doing, the system audit logs and records. And the reason why is because this right here is what we are going to be able to use to look for things not working correctly in this system. All right, so if we have dropouts where, a time where certain boxes didn't synchronize correctly, something like that, The place we're going to get visibility into that is going to be the audit logs. All right, the synchronization takes place a lot of times. It's a lot of traffic. It's a lot of constant information happening. There are synchronizations when it boots up. There are checks. As it's just running, there are checks, things like that. So this is the place where we're going to be able to, pull out that kind of information is in the logs to see if we're missing things. All right, the interviews for this are, of course, going to be information security responsibilities and system and network administrators. So the network admins are probably going to be setting up and maintaining the devices that are handling the time. Well, to be honest, the things that are generating the logs that we're trying to get a timestamp on, and they're also going to be setting up the time server and running the time server. The security people are going to notice right away because their timestamps are going to be all garbage and they're not going to be able to figure out what's going on. And of course, system developers, the reason we want to talk to them is, again, if we've got internal systems that are custom designed, all right, we need to know how their time stuff is working, how they're going to get that lined up with us. How do we evaluate and test it? Well, we do this. We check and make sure that the internal clocks are synchronized on the system. So I mean, this one is fairly straightforward to check. Now, of course, protecting your audit data. So our objective here is to make sure that somebody, can't get at our data or our logs. If somebody breaks into something, your logs are how you're going to track them. If somebody breaks in and messes with your logs, deletes or alters your logs, now all bets are off. You don't have anything. You have nothing to work from at that point. All right. So what we're trying to determine is the log information protected from unauthorized access? Is it protected from unauthorized modification? Is it protected from unauthorized deletion? Are the tools protected from unauthorized access, modification, or deletion? Right? Any of these things, well, access is bad enough, right? They can basically see what you're logging and use the same materials you are. They'll know what you're basing your decision making off of. All right, as far as catching things going wrong. But as far as modification and deletion goes, if either one of these happens, your logs are pretty much useless. All right, so this is what we need to determine. We need to make sure that all of this is not happening. Right, so what is acceptable evidence? Well, we can look at the design documentation, the configuration, the audit logs. We can take some samples of known good logs and compare them against what we have. Audit logging tools. We can see what we're using for that and how secure are they? Do they have bugs? So, I wish this one doesn't really have a standout one that's more important than the rest. This is really across the board. You have to look in all these places and make sure everything is done right here. Again, if your actual audit information, your logs and your data is altered or messed with, then none of the rest of this counts. All right, so we need to make sure that's all in place. So as far as the auditing here, of course, the audit and account responsibilities, we could talk to them. But notice once again, we want to talk to the information security people to get a look at the logs. We want to see how that's being handled, how they're accessing them, and whether or not they've seen any changes. We also want the system or network administrators. We want to talk to them to see what their configs are, how it's set up. See if they have any ideas of what could be better, or whether or not they think, what they think of the current way we're handling it. System developers, because again, they might be writing some type of custom log, and we want to analyze that and see, whether or not that could be an issue, whether or not their logs can be altered or so there's some kind of attack vector there, where their logs could be changed. All right, how do we test it? Well, we just we just want to see what what are the results? What can we what kind of defense is there? I mean, this is a red teaming event, right? We're basically testing what, doing an audit of what kind of defenses we have on our actual, logging information. So you can almost look at it as the same way, we would audit a regular system, only this time it's our, it's our visibility. Now, notice here, limit management of the audit logging functionality to a subset of privileged users. Of course, when the material you're working with is basically your security data, what you're actually making your decisions off of. Of course, that's got to be set up for least privilege. We can't be having any user able to access that. And not only manage, I mean, here it specifies limit management of audit logging functionality to subset, not only management, but even viewing. You don't really want people who don't need to know, you don't want them to exactly know what kind of visibility you have. All right, so I'm just saying that this is extended a little further than this. Right, your objective, make sure that a subset of privileged users are granted access to manage audit logging functionality is defined. We want to know exactly who has access to this. All right, this should be a small list, or at least a list of a group that makes sense. All right, so you'll notice here, notice here just to the ability to manage those audit logging functionality. You want to make sure that that's set to a subset of privileged users too. So not even just the privileged users, but you want a subset of even those that can manage it. Right. So what's our acceptable evidence? Again, almost everything here is important again. I think honestly that what we really want to look at here though is I think we want to look at these two. We want to look at the access authorizations. We want to look at the generated list of privileged users that have access to this. And notice it's a system generated. We want to look at who the system thinks is allowed in there. All right. And we want to jive that with this. We want to make sure that these two things match up with what we think is going on. And then, of course, we want to audit the access control list. All right, for the system audit logs and the records. We want to see exactly who has access to interact with these log files via the access control list. So as we go down and we look at these three things right here, this should give us all the answers. All right, who do we think should be able to access this stuff? Who actually can access this stuff? What are the users that are allowed on there? Then down here, who out of this set actually has access to touch these? All right, so these are, I think this is your strongest documentation right down here. Who do we interview? Of course, this person's always on there. We're just going to ignore them from now on. The person with the information security responsibilities, of course, because we want to, they're the ones who are going to see the, if we're following our rules from before, they're the ones who are going to see people trying to access the logs that aren't supposed to. The system or network administrators, because they're the ones who are setting the privileges on those resources. And of course, your system developers are in there because we need, again, if we got anything customer out of the ordinary, we need to know what the edge cases are here. How do we evaluate or test it? Well, we can just go ahead and we can look at whether or not they have access. All right. I mean, this is a simple auditing to see who all is touching the logs in that area, who else trying to. All right. So that covers that covers this portion. Is there any questions on the accounting and auditing part here? Incidentally, I just want to throw this out there. If you've got some experiences in this and you want to throw something, you've got something you want to add, and something that you've got to add to this, just stop me for a second and we'll go in. I just tend to keep going unless somebody says something. So any questions on this one?
Nope, no questions for me. Thanks.
All righty. I think we'll take just a 5-minute break here. I'm going to grab some water and then we will go on to the next section. Okay, I think we'll get rolling here. Just had to grab a little bit more coffee, I guess. Okay, so what we're looking at next is incident response. For the most part here, the better you're prepared and the better you have thought out the different potential ways that an attack scenario can happen, and ways that you have thought of to get visibility into that and react to that, the less damage that it's likely to do. And just statistically, I mean, that, obviously there's edge cases, but the more events that you've thought of, the more time you have to find outliers. So, if everything is an unknown, then trying to find anything is going to be difficult. Whereas if you've thought out and you've planned for, 90% of the events, you only have to really worry about the 10% that you're not expecting because you don't know what's going to happen. All right. So that's kind of what incident response is about. I think this thing is just in the start of all of these. All right. So what is level 2 of incident response in this? Well, first up is incident handling. We want to basically make sure that we have incident handling capability for the organization. So we want to make sure that we've figured out how we're going to detect it, how we're going to rapidly analyze it based on our data, and how, based on that data, we can contain a given event, and then how we can recover. All right. And we want to figure out and define what the response activities are. All right. Incident reporting. How do we track, document, and report them? All right. To whoever needs to know, both internally and externally. Some violations, of course, need to be reported, according to law, need to be reported. So we need to figure out, how are we, what's our process for getting all of that happening. All right. And how do we test it to make sure that we have the capability that we think we do. All right. So this is basically our this is basically the order here. Preparation, where we're gonna think out what what could possibly happen, and based on that, we are going to figure out what we can use to detect those threats that we've thought about, and then we're going to figure out how we can take the data that we're getting and analyze it and figure out whether or not it matches one of these threats, and then if it does, we want to know how to contain it and how we can recover and get back up and going. All right, so what is our audit objective? We want to, number one, see if they have any kind of capability established. All right, has this been thought about, and have they actually got something going on? And then we need to make sure that they have gone through each one of the steps. They've thought about all of the steps and documented what to do. All right, including a list of user response activities. What do we have to do? As far as each person goes. So what's the evidence? Well, how do we see what they've got going here? Well, we want to see the incident response policy, definitely. We want to see the contingency planning policy. We want to see the list of procedures for incident handling and for incident response. We definitely want to see their incident response plan, contingency plan, and the system security plan. The thing with the thing with this is that some of the other stuff that we're doing is a little bit more where we're just getting kind of procedures down for how we're going to audit it, how we're going to monitor we're doing it sort of right. With this particular piece, these things in writing and with a thorough plan is way important, because it needs to be done rapidly. And generally speaking, the reaction is going to be done under distress because something went wrong. When the incident response and incident handling means there was a incident. Something has gone wrong that has facilitated where we're at now. So again, the more you can think of up front, and the more that you can plan appropriately for those things before they happen, the better you're going to be able to react to this. So that's why and going through and analyzing these things are extremely important. Now, notice we got something new here also. Notice the way we have to have some procedures for handling incident response training. We need to have curriculum, materials, records. We need to know that people are being trained with how to react. Notice that this shows up in a couple places in the CMMC. But remember, the thing here is that this has to be like muscle memory. When something goes wrong, we got to know who's got to do what and react really quick. All right. So again, the training becomes really important here. So who do we interview to see how we're doing? All right. Of course, the people with the incident handling responsibilities, the contingency planning responsibilities. We also want to interview the trainers to see what they're being trained in. And, also figure out what the assistance and support responsibilities are to support the incident handling. All right. So, and what that capability is. And personnel with information security responsibilities, of course. So don't forget the training parts here, because this is super relevant to making sure that they're up to speed. All right. How do we evaluate or test it? Well, we just do it. We do mock incidents. This is again, this is sort of what red teaming is for some things. We test the organizational processes for incident response. The nice thing here is we can do drills because it is reacting to an event. We don't need a real event to react to, right? The process for reacting to a mock event can be a really good representation of what a real event would look like without having to actually have a real event. All right. So as far as evaluating and testing, we just come up with a scenario, and then we see how the scenario plays out using the training and the documentation that we've made up for this. All right. Incident reporting. We need to. Our objectives here. All right. We want to make sure that incidents are being tracked. Right. When something happens, we want to be able to, have a time, date, what happened, when, who discovered it, all of this stuff. All right. We want to make sure it's well documented. All right. We want to make sure that we know who is supposed to get a report of this particular incident immediately, after it happens. All right. We want to make sure that those people are identified, and we want to identify any authorities or any organizational officials that need to be organized or notified of that. All right. So what is this? Well, this is obviously going to be a list, right? So if you look, it should be defined loosely in the incident response policy. But as we go down here, you're going to see that it might be in these procedures here too, but down here, the procedures for addressing incident reporting and incident reporting records and documentations, and the response and security plan. This is where you're going to see, this is where we should be able to find exactly who else is supposed to be notified. All right. Right down to in what order, and they should, the plan should actually have the contact information, all of that kind of stuff. All right. For exactly who we should go through for this. People we're going to interview: incident monitoring responsibilities, incident report responsibilities. Now notice this: who have or should have reported the incidents. All right. So in other words, we want to talk to whoever noticed the incident and find out, okay, so, oh, hold on, how do I? There we go. Sorry about that. I just noticed that you were in the waiting room there. Didn't mean to not have you in there. Okay, so down here, the reason we're asking this is because we want to know, okay, so, you did report this, or you were supposed to report this. So how difficult was that to do? Do you have the tools in place to make that possible, to make that easy to do? What went into being able to accomplish your job that you're supposed to do here of reporting on this? All right. We want to see the flip side. All right. The person who is supposed to be reported to. How difficult was it for, did you get that information in a timely manner? Were the mechanisms there for you to, get the information you needed to act on that report? All right. So I'd say these two are probably the most important out of it. The person who's doing the reporting and the person who's receiving the report. This is where we can opt it. We can see what's working, what's not working, and we can optimize it. All right. And personnel with information security responsibilities, of course, it's the people. So how do we evaluate this? How do we test, see whether or not it's working right? All right. Well, right here, we can, we want to check the mechanism supporting tracking and documenting of system security events and for reporting. Again, what does this look like? How difficult is it to do our job? Do we have something that, do we have a way where we can generate a report and share it and extract information out of that? What kind of mechanism do we have going there? All right, what kind of mechanisms do we have that are made for supporting incident reporting? We want to test each of those. All right, now incident response testing. This is, again, we want to basically see whether or not what we are thinking, what we're trying to do is effective or not. So what's our objectives? We just want to see what the capability is, whether or not our plans are going to work or not. All right. Again, remember with this, let's look at the acceptable evidence. Again, with this, you want to remember that we can just come up with mock events. This is war games. That's what this is. We're basically, going, okay, well, this went wrong. Now do what you do. Do what you would normally do here, and we can totally test the incident response capabilities by doing this in an effective way. So what kind of documentation? We can look at what the policy is to see what what we're supposed to be doing in these two documents, and then we can look at what our procedures are for testing that. All right. So again, you're going to look at what we're supposed to be doing here, and then we can write scenarios that test these policies. We want to look at what the procedures are for generating those test procedures, though. And the reason why, and down here again, materials results plan. Again, the reason why these are important in here is because we need to make sure that what we're testing lines up with what we are trying to accomplish. So let's, for example, just say, that we come up with it. And this is just an off the cuff one. Okay. So let's say that, for example, we want to test our incident response capability, and we write up a scenario for, a flood. All right. And we test it and we come through with flying colors. We have all kinds of stuff. People will be able to run to the server room and load all the crap on a raft or something. I don't know, whatever our plan is. So that works, right? Now, if we are just doing that, right? If we're just testing certain aspects of our response, our incident response capability, it's really not accomplishing what we need. So because we need to see whether or not we can respond to different incidents, to different events. All right. So that's why this is good. These are good assessment places to go to, because we want to see, how do we generate those scenarios? What do the testing materials look like? Do they vary? Do they change? Do they cover a wide range of incidents? What is what's going on? What are our results? Do we have do we react good to some incidents, but other incidents we're not ready for? Like, let's say we've got a superstar team that, that can, stop all the hackers and all that's great. But the minute, we get a flood, all is done. The whole thing is shot, right? We want to look at our test results and see if there's areas we're weak or strong in, and then, adjust accordingly. All right. We can also check our contingency plan and system security plan, and update these according to the, what our results are up here. Right. People we interview, down here, I think is the new ground here. We want to interview the people who are responsible for the testing plans. Again, we want to see where they're coming from with this, as far as confirming the capability of the organization. We want to see, okay, so are you guys continuously coming up with some new material to to try new things, to actually see how the organization responds to different things. So this one I think is really important here, the bottom one. Right, how do we evaluate it? All right, well, we literally just want to see how they respond to the incidents. Is it effective? Is it in line with what our policies are, our contingency plan and our incident response policies? Does what's happening in these different event scenarios line up with that? All right. Any questions on the incident response part here?
If we're looking at this for CMMC and we're looking at this as a third-party evaluator, to what level are we looking for the evaluator to look at the evidence that they can recover from different incidents? Is it just their tabletop response, or do they really need to bring servers down and then bring servers up, or wipe out computers and restore them at another location? Do they actually need to do it, or they need to have a plan to do it? In regards, if we're a third-party evaluator for CMMC.
Well, so I mean, what the idea here is that you want to make sure that the capability is there. So you would probably more want to do like a test mechanism. You would build a test mechanism into the audit, because I don't think we'd necessarily want to I don't think we'd want to take a live system down and then do this, right? I think we'd want to build a simulation, a way to safely simulate it in. We really are looking for the availability, the ability of the team to activate and to respond to the event and see if they can do that successfully. But I think you'd probably build a test bed into the event. You know what I mean? And you'd probably build the test bed into the test.
Yeah, I mean, it's way easier to say what we would do than to show, wow, we thought we would do this and we actually tried it and things didn't go the way that we planned that they would go.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to activate the whole team, but you could activate the team to work on mock data. You know what I mean? So we wouldn't have to take the main database down. We could make a copy of it and knock that down. You know what I mean? But you do need to test the response across the board. I mean, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that you can pull from is you never know if your backup works until you need it, unless you're testing it.
Exactly that.
Yep. So yeah, no, you'd need to build, up and out. You'd need to build something that is mock and close enough to the real thing where you could see how everybody's response is and how the equipment you're using responds in that situation.
So if we're a third-party evaluator looking at an organization that wants to be a level 2 or 3, what is the evaluator's responsibility in that we do the interviews and we look at their documentation and say, okay, or do they need to show us?
You're evaluating. Remember, you're evaluating. Let me see if I can. These things are a little bit weird here. I just want to see if I can get back to Okay, there's this. Okay, right here. Yeah. So if you look at the docket at what you're at the documentation you're going to get, right? You're not actually sitting down and having them, run through the thing. What you're looking at is you're looking at, okay, what's their documented procedures? What were they supposed to do? And then you're looking at what they actually did in that situation. So from your perspective, the incident response thing was like, oh, we knocked down database server web front end. Let's say we did that, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what you're concerned with is that all the cogs in the, all the gears work together. And when you look at the test result, the plan and the results matched up with what was supposed to be happening. You know what I mean?
They actually had some results. They actually did, they didn't just stop at, hey, we maybe would do this.
That's right. And there should be, and the results should include a report on, okay, here was the arc of the test, right? I mean, it's an event. It's a okay, here we've triggered this event. Do your thing. Do it. What happens now if our real database is down? Just do that stuff. Okay. And you need to see, okay, who did what, when, what was effective, did pieces not work? All that should be in the results, and that should be what's in the report. And we need to see that is varying, right? That they're testing different events. And what are the results? Are the results from some of these tests not as good as other ones? Like, did your team not respond as well to this one? So that's why it's kind of, you'll notice here when we do the interviews, you notice the way there is always this person on top, the incident response testing responsibilities in the, where is it here? The auditor person, of course, is not in the one that I want to show you. But they always have that personnel, who are responsible for auditing. That's why that's there, because there's always, it's always got to be somebody else who's interpreting the results of the audit. You know what I mean? Somebody who's
not just us telling ourselves that we did the perfect thing.
Exactly. Because you're gonna have the plan. You're gonna trigger the plan. And then you're gonna log the results of how well the plan worked. But somebody has to be interpreting how well the plan worked. You know what I mean? That's somebody's job. And usually that team, rolls back in change recommendations and stuff like that. You could have done better here. Why don't we modify this? And it rolls back into the policy there. But from an auditor's perspective, you're going to be able to talk to these people. You're going to be able to look at, this thing works a little weird. Okay, there's that. There it is. Okay. This is what you're kind of going to have at your disposal, or recommended things at your disposal to look at. And again, you're trying to correlate these things together. You want to see if the plan, number one, you want to look at the plan. You want to see if the tests are adequately testing the different parts of the plan. And then you want to look at the results to see whether or not the test actually, once we tested it, did the test actually result in a set of events that works, or do we have weak spots that we need to fix?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Let's take just a quick 5-minute. I just have to grab the next slides here. Not sure how it's named, so I'll be back in just a second. All right, I think I got everything lined up here. Okay, so next part here is doing a security assessment. All right, and this is where we go in and we kind of kick the doors and see whether or not the organization is reaching the minimum requirements for what they're supposed to be doing, and whether or not what we're seeing lines up with with what their policies define. All right. Of course, we're down to, we've got the 3-level deal now. Just kind of. All right. So a few things here. So if you take a look, what we're testing for here, and we'll go into more details here, is number one, security control assessment. We want to figure out now, and let's just briefly define a control. I think everybody in here probably knows what this is already, but let's just define it really quickly. All right. A control is a mechanism for preventing a given security issue. All right. For example, we could say, so my SQL server is available from the internet and could get attacked. Well, a best practice, a control that could be put in place is, how about if on the perimeter firewall, since we don't need access directly to the database from the internet, let's close that port. All right, that's just a basic idea of a control. If we were to use an example of like going into a building, a control could be putting a lock on a door. An additional control could be putting a camera over the door so you can see people approaching the door along with the lock. So that's the idea of a control. It is something that we can do in response to a given security issue. All right. So the first thing the first thing is a security control assessment, seeing whether or not the controls that they have in place are adequate, and if they're doing the desired outcome. Okay. Next is we want to check if they have a plan of action for correcting issues or eliminate vulnerabilities. Now, again, generally speaking, deficiencies and vulnerabilities are corrected with controls. Control is something we do to react to and correct something here. So do we have a plan of action once we've assessed the controls and found a problem, do we have a plan of action to implement that? All right. And then are we monitoring it? All right. Are we making sure that whatever we're doing is still effective? All right. And we alter our thought process according to that and our procedures according to that. Are we monitoring to see if it's still effective? And then we want to make sure that they actually have a plan. Where we're actually, going through and reassessing the environment and figuring out, okay, because if you want to think about it, let's think about how you would secure a building. All right, again, so we got 2 windows and 2 doors. All right, so the first thing we would probably do is we would probably go, okay, so let's go ahead and put some locks on the doors. Let's close the windows. That's good, right? Well, now somebody, opens a window from outside, slides in and steals our stuff. Now, all of a sudden, we're monitoring it. We can see that wasn't effective. So do we have a plan of action to add some locks to the windows? Yes, we do. All right. So those are reactive things. All right. It's monitoring the control and reacting to that is reactive. Now, we want to re-go through our plan periodically to figure out what happened. Like what if all of a sudden, the building's been changed and now we have 3 big docking doors with smaller doors beside them or things like that, right? Well, we have to reassess our controls. We have to figure out whether or not what we're doing is still effective, and what changes we have to make and implement in order to do that. So that's kind of the idea of this. All right. So a security control assessment. All right. You can see over here, we've got preventative, detective, corrective, deterrent, recovery, and compensating. So these are the different levels. And I'm just going to click this, and you can almost guess it's right. So what we need to do is we need to figure out, how often the security controls are reassessed. All right. And we want to see if it is defined with frequently enough to be able to tell if they're effective in what they're doing. So, if we're not going over and monitoring how effective our security controls are, do we actually know whether or not the outcomes are what we think they are? All right. What's some acceptable evidence here? Well, we're going to look at the policy. And we're going to look at the procedures for assessment planning and for doing security assessments. Hopefully this stuff will, it should be defined in the assessment policy and the security plan. All right. How often you're going to review it and what you're going to look at. But then this is just the actual step-by-step policies that we can assess. Who do we interview? Well, security assessment responsibilities and information security responsibilities. All right. So we need the people who are testing it, and we need the people who are actually responsible for using it. And between those two, we should be able to get enough information to define, whether or not we're doing things often enough. So how do we test it? Pretty straightforward. We can basically check, how frequently that we're updating it, and then, make some just broad assessments on whether or not that's effective. So for example, if we had a series of attacks happen in a short period of time, and, but enough time where we should have been able to assess that one of our controls isn't working and isn't adequate, and we get hit the same way multiple times. Well, that's a way we can evaluate it. Is there something we're lacking here that needs to be fixed? All right. So we want to make sure that they have a plan of action that's designed to correlate what's deficient, what's not working, and to reduce or eliminate the vulnerabilities that those deficiencies are causing. All right, what we're looking for here is we want to see whether or not deficiencies are addressed by whatever the plan of action is. So once we audit, we find a problem that one of our controls is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. We want to see whether or not there is an action plan in place or a procedure used for reacting to that. All right. Now, from an auditor's perspective, all right, what we are looking for here is we are looking for the documentation. We're looking for the paper trail that says, all right, so here we found a deficiency in our controls that made us vulnerable to something, and that could have or could not have. We don't know if it happened or not, but we found the deficiency. What we're looking for here is the paper trail that goes from that, and then we want to see the action plan. All right, what is the plan to counter this? All right, that's what we're looking for here. And then we also want to see, again, to complete the arc, we also want to see that the plan was completed. What were the steps taken what did we implement that would correct those problems, that corrects those vulnerabilities? Was that implemented? All right. Did we have challenges? Are there things that could have been done better? Right. Now down here, again, I always like picking a couple of them out. Not that any of these aren't a great source of data, but if we look, I think your big things here are going to be number one, the security assessment report, because what we're looking at here is we're looking for, okay, so what did we find? what was wrong, where do we need improvement? And then if we come down here, if you look at the plan of action, what change were we able to make resulting in this? All right, I think the cycle of being able to see a report in a corresponding plan of action for change, I think the combination of these two really indicate that they have something in place, all right, something strong in place. All right, the people that we're going to interview here, all right, of course, going to be the personnel with the plan of action development and the information security people. All right, again, these guys are monitoring and detecting and watching, using these controls on a day-to-day basis. And they're detecting the failures in these controls. And then these people up here are actually developing how they're going to implement a change to correct whatever those issues are. All right, evaluate, test. All right. Again, implementing and maintaining plan of action. So you want to see a cycle of, you want to see a regular cycle of finding a problem in the defense, and we want to see a regular plan being developed to correct these things. Again, it's a cycle. It's not a single thing. It's going to be what kind of cycle you see for them developing a reactionary plan to a problem. All right, now security control monitoring. You need to ensure that the controls continue to be effective. All right. Let's give an example of a control that could possibly not be effective. Like, let's say, so back in the old days, you might have been able to enforce a Windows password policy where the passwords had to be up to 5 characters or whatever. We didn't just pick an arbitrary thing. So the reason we need to monitor is because as technology changes, all right, one of the things that happens are things that were difficult or very improbable to have happened before, in the old days, are almost commonplace and easy at this point. All right, things like rainbow tables for cracking passwords and stuff like that have really changed the dynamic on how we have to deal with something like that with passwords. Tools like Metasploit, for example, all right, have really changed the dynamic of of the relationship between defenders and attackers. If you go back before tools like Metasploit, your adversaries were people who were writing custom code who really understood the underpinnings of how the operating systems were working and were doing all this really high level, difficult to do stuff. All right, you had some very, very good, but very few attackers coming after you. Now, when you have something like Metasploit and you've automated, you've canned some of these capabilities, and now you've got a whole bunch of less skilled attackers coming after you. So again, the controls that were effective against these, a very small number of very skilled hackers, which we probably couldn't keep on anyway, don't work the same way. They're not as effective against a whole, slew of other attackers. So we have to think about that. And we have to make sure that what we're doing is effective still. All right. So we want to make sure the security controls are effective in an ongoing basis. Actually, I have one more example that I want to throw out there with this one because I think this is such a fantastic one. So you go back, probably, 10 years maybe, and intrusion detection, network-based intrusion detection was very effective. All right, and the reason why is because we have traffic going through the network, and we could sniff it. We could look for malicious patterns. We could look for executables. We could look for, we had all of these. All of this material that we could use to detect these attacks. All right. What is a huge thing that forced us to have to change gears on that and analyze that kind of Take a different stance. Instead of just sniffing traffic and looking for patterns, what is a huge thing that completely changed that dynamic? Every one of you uses it every day, and you don't even think about it at this point. But from the perspective of doing a network-based intrusion detection, it completely changed the dynamic of how we have to approach that. Any thoughts? Remember, every one of you uses it every day. As a matter of fact, you're using it right now for this session.
Zoom?
Well, not just Zoom, but yes, encryption. That's what I was going for. All right, encryption completely changed the dynamic. Now we had to go back and we had to look at our controls and go, whoa, we just lost visibility into all of this. All of this stuff that was a given that we could find easy, now we can't. So what do we do? Well, now we have to look for, well, what does malicious traffic look for? Is it this much data going in this period of time or at a regular interval? It changed the dynamic, and that's what this is really all about. You want to see if they have mechanisms in place to be able to think about, well, that didn't work. What do we do next? All right. We want to make sure that they're monitoring and reacting to that, because some things that were effective aren't anymore. Right? What's the effective evidence? So this is the thing right here. With this, we want to make sure that procedures addressing system security plan reviews and updates are in place. All right. And we want to make sure there are organizational procedures that define, plan development and implementation. In this, for me, these are the important ones right here. All right. And then, of course, records of system security plan reviews and updates. Again, we need to, what's happening? Come on. There it is. Again, we need to be able to, you as an auditor want to be able to look at something that says, okay, you know what? I can see that they've got these happening, but, let's see some records. Let's see that they actually, did something with these. And the interview people are right here. All right. I mean, this is pretty much the same, for all of these with the information security, and then who's responsible for this particular piece. All right. How do you evaluate? Well, this is pretty straightforward. We just go in and we look at, what the plan is for, development, review, update, approval, all of this. And then we look at the records to see what, how many times have they done this? How effective are they at doing this? All right. Now, system security plans. These are basically what defines a given system. What are the boundaries? What are the edges of the system? What are the relationships between the different systems? And then define how the security requirements. What's the actual implementation details? All right. So if you look here, these are the value of the data assets, business strategy, rival customers. All of this kind of stuff is all stuff that we take into consideration. Right. What's our objective? Want to make sure security plans developed. That they have one. We want to figure out what they think their system boundaries are, what their definition of their system boundaries are. All right. You want to make sure that the environment described in the document is in the security plan. All right. That what their actual design looks like is what's in the security plan. You want to make sure that, notice right here, you need to make sure that the security requirements identified and approved as non-applicable are identified. We want to make sure that that somebody has officially, said that these are not applicable in this situation. All right. So the method of security requirement implementation gets clearly described in the security plan. The relationships to other systems is described in the security plan. How are things supposed to react? How often we have to update the security plan should be part of it. Right. Again, remember, these things got to be updated constantly, depending on what we're doing. There's going to be one real hard slog where you're going to build a big, overall system, but then you're going to be making a whole bunch of little tweaks all the time. And we need to, of course, have documentation that it is being updated in the, at the frequency it's supposed to be. What can we use for evidence? All right, let's see if we can pick out a couple of these that are really relevant here. All right. Number one, we are going to figure out what the procedures are for security plan development and implementation. And then down here, we're going to figure out when the reviews and the updates are. Right. Again, these two are probably the most important. And then if we go down there, this right here confirms these two. All right. Records of system security plan reviews and updates. All right. We need to make sure that this is happening. Usual suspects here, information security people and the plan writers. How are you going to evaluate it? All right. You're going to review the update and approval mechanisms and, just check the records. Have they been doing this? You're looking for regular patterns. All right. Any questions on this one? Okay, we have got one more to go through today. Let me, there we go. Let me just pull that guy up quick. Okay. Okay. Truth be told, in this one, I've done the three, the incident response, the system auditing, and the account auditing multiple times. This is my first time doing the media protection one. I mean, you can kind of see the plan here. This is my first time doing this particular slide presentation, so I'm just giving you a heads up on that one. Okay, so media protection, basically this makes sure that the system media basically is defended against basically access after loss. All right, so let's say that we want to make sure that that the media itself is protected against being accessed by people who are not supposed to. All right. And again, before this was defined, we ran into some pretty crazy stuff. We would, working in the college system, we would get access to a lot of used gear. People would donate stuff. They would donate computers. We even, believe it or not, we even got a set of Cisco. Somebody stripped out all the old Cisco stuff at an organization and replaced it with all new stuff and gave us all their old stuff. Somebody forgot to wipe all the configs off, and we had all of we knew everything about the configuration for the entire organization. It was like, that is the kind of thing that this is made to prevent. All right. How do we dispose of old media or other devices for that matter? To ensure that that's not recoverable. So if you notice here, sanitize or destroy information system media containing federal contract information before disposal or release for reuse. The idea here is to make sure that you've gone through some procedures so that it does not, nobody can access that. Now, our objective, all right, we want to make sure that it's sanitized or destroyed before disposal. All right, do not assume that just because you're throwing it in the trash that nobody's going to go dig it out. All right, that thing has to be encrypted. We have to drill holes in it. We have to catch it on fire. Something has to happen. All right, or you want to make sure that it's sanitized before going out for reuse. All right, so now in the old days, you used to be able to, so like on the old disk platters, you used to be able to just write ones and zeros over it a bunch of times or write patterns over it. And then make it, so that there was no way to really recover that data reasonably. There's a whole new set of rules with the newer solid state drives. Those are an entirely different animal. I'm not even sure, now granted, I haven't looked into this in a couple of years, but at the time I was looking at it, there was no good way to completely zero one of those out. They have algorithms in them that automates, organizing the data so it doesn't overwrite itself. And it makes it really, really difficult to zero one of those out. And there may be people in here who do more recent forensics than I've done. That may not be the case anymore. They may have some good tools for doing that, but the last time I checked into it, there was not a good way to do that. So let's go ahead here. Except for the Apple way, where basically you initially encrypt the drive when you have it, and as soon as when you're done with it, you just destroy the key so that it's not recoverable. All right, so that's our audit objective. So what can we take as evidence? Well, we want to figure out what the policy is. What is their plan? We want to know what the procedures are. What are the step-by-step procedures that they're taking to get rid of this data? All right. We want to find out what the standards and policies are addressing that. What are they supposed to do? And then we want to know we want to see media sanitization records, system audit log records, design documents. So here's the reason why. All right. We want to know whether or not the sanitization records match up and are getting rid of all of the different devices that are going out, right? So for everything that comes out of a system and is going back into production or getting thrown out, we should have a sanitization record that's associated with that, right? Who do we interview? Who's responsible for sanitizing the drives? Who's supposed to be zeroing them out or destroying them? All right. Personnel with information security responsibilities. Maybe out of the set of the media sanitization drives or whatever, maybe we're going to pull a few and we're going to test and see if we can recover data off. All right. So that, we might want to interview anybody that would have to do with that. System or network administrators. Here, we may want to be able to see if we can line up a list of what's been decommissioned with what has been sanitized. All right, and figure out. So those three kind of work in unison to be able to do the job, test the job, and then correlate that everything that's gone out of production has gone through this process. How do we evaluate it? We want to make sure that again, that they have something in place that's working, that it's effective, and then also probably have people check a subset of the data of the equipment. Just go, hey, we need to make sure that this is doing what we're supposed to be doing here, that this is zeroed. So that's basically how we can do that. Now, what you're looking for as an auditor is to make sure that that is happening. You want records. You want a log of that actually occurring. All right. So at level 2 here, all right, those are the basics. At level 2, this is what we need to do. So we need to basically physically control and secure any data. All right, this is physical access to it. Media access, limit access, to authorize the users only of that particular, whatever it is, be it disk drive, piece of paper, whatever. All right, we want to mark it and make sure that it is identified for how it's allowed to be distributed or accessed. All right, and we want to make sure that we can figure out who has moved that. Go back. Okay, we want to make sure that we control how that media moves in and out of controlled areas. All right. So in other words, we don't want somebody able, if we got a hard drive that, a thumb drive or something like that, that's only supposed to be in a restricted area. We want to make sure nobody wanders out of the restricted area and takes that someplace and comes back, something like that. Excuse me. All right, so here's our media protection. Again, this is just physical access. All right. Notice we're just making sure everything is physically controlled and securely stored. Evidence, well, this one's pretty straightforward. What's our policy? And we should have a report on, yeah, right here, access control records. To me, these are the two most important things, all right? We want to see what the policy and procedures are, and then we want to see what the access control records are. We just want to, it's an in and out. We want to see what the things are and who's accessing them. Interview people, the usual suspects here, system media protection responsibilities, information security is almost there, and system or network administrators, because they are probably the ones handling the actual gear. How do we evaluate it? Basically, we just want to confirm, you know, again, we can look at the reports for who's accessing which media. All right. So we want to make sure we limit it to authorized users. The goal is to make sure only authorized users get access to it. All right. How do we do it? Now let's look at this. Physical and environmental protection policies. You know, this is physical access and access control policies and procedures. And where is our, oh, and this one too, designated controlled areas to ensure that, you know, that material is not removed from an area. And that the people going in there are only the people who are supposed to. So interview people, evaluating and testing. You know, we just want to see what the process is for storing media. Where do we put it? You know, and what kind of access is required to get to there. And then, you know, make sure that there's implementing the secure media storage and media protection mechanisms. All right. So media markings. This is just kind of a weird way of talking about the, you know, the military style access controls. You know, what is it? The mandatory access controls. I'm trying to remember what this is called. So anyway, it's the top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified. In the case here, remember, this is that whole thing where you can always, you know, send documents to a higher level, but you're not allowed to ever take a document to a lower level, right? So something that's confidential can always be sent, can always be handed off to something, you know, to something with secret, but something secret cannot go down to confidential. So the layers are, you know, one direction only. All right, so media containing it's marked with the applicable marking, all right, and it is marked with distribution limitations. So I mean, another thing too, the other thing you want to think about in this model. So you've got unclassified, confidential, secret, and top secret, but that doesn't mean that all secrets are created equal, right? So that doesn't mean, you know, or top secret is created equal. You know, so that doesn't mean that. You know, someone who knows about, you know, a new type of, you know, military rifle, that doesn't mean that same person has a right to know what's sitting in Area 51, for example. So, you know, the distribution limitations are identifying, you know, who needs to have access to that, you know, where this is relevant data, and then the applicable level marking, you know, as in secret, top secret, then that's also on there. So there's multiple limitations on there. All right. For this one, again, a list of the system media marking security attributes, designated controlled areas. You know, all of this is kind of important here because if you think about it, we need to. All of this is important to maintain this chain here. People, the same thing, you know, it's always the person who's responsible for this thing in information security. All right, so how do we evaluate? Well, let's just take a sampling of, you know, the different, you know, markings and see whether or not the rules are being followed. All right, a lot of the time when you have this type of a system, you will have mechanisms with who is accessing each level and where that data is moving. So you'll have records where you can actually look and make sure that everything's following what it's supposed to be doing. As an auditor, they're probably not going to give you access to the actual records, but it's just that. All right. So if we look here, level 2, portable storage encryption. This is cryptographic mechanisms. All right. Control of removable media system components. Like, do we want these at all? Are we going to allow access to removable system components? Shared media. Are we going to prohibit portable storage devices? That have no identifiable owner, and protect backups. How are we going to protect the confidentiality of backups at a storage facility? Generally speaking, encryption covers this down here too. So media accountability. Right, our audit objective is to make sure that access to that media is controlled. All right, and we want to make sure that control is maintained during transfer outside of controlled areas. All right, what we're really talking about here is we're talking about offsite backups. All right, so for example, let's say I've got all of the all the records, the personal records for all the employees in my organization. Well, needless to say, they're probably in a database. I'm probably going to make a backup of that, in case I have to recover from some incident. Well, what are my mechanisms for making sure that that's protected? Is it stored on the drives encrypted so that if once it's outside of our organization that's certainly controlled and it's being transferred somewhere, is there a mechanism to make sure that whoever's moving that can't get the data off of there? That sort of thing. So what's the evidence? Well, we want to see what the policies are and the procedures. All right. And we want to also see where the designated control areas are. And this will give us the ability to kind of figure out, okay, so what's the plan for when we, according to the policy, we're outside of the designated control area. What is the plan for the data at that point? What you're looking for is you're looking for a plan on what they do with that. These are the people we're going to talk to here. All right. And again, how do we test it? Well, we would probably actually want to see the evidence of, so here's the procedure that we're supposed to do in confirmation of the handling between the 2 points. We should be able to see records of the procedure being followed between those 2 points. Like, okay, this is getting ready to go out to be taken to the backup facility. Has it been encrypted? Yes. Did whoever's driving it there sign it out? Yes. Did it arrive at the other end and get signed in? Yes. All of that kind of stuff. All right. So we want to make sure that's how we're going to confirm that they're actually paying attention to policy here. All right. And this is implementing the cryptographical stuff for the digital media during transport. All right. Unless it's protected by an alternate physical safeguards, it's difficult not to be. It's difficult to not want to encrypt stuff. I mean, this is just a catch-all that solves many problems. All right. This is basically to maintain the confidentiality of the data. All right, that's what we're trying to determine is if the confidentiality of that data is being secured when it's being transported. All right, so our important ones here, I would say, all right, are our procedures for addressing media transport. All right, the reason the system design documentation might be relevant here is because maybe the system is encrypting it already and is handling it, and this will define that. All right. Also, the system configuration setting and associated document would help define that. We probably want to look at the transport records and maybe some of the audit logs. This would tell us, was that media encrypted as it was supposed to be before it went? That would be in an audit log, and also this. What was the records on transporting that particular stuff? The interviewees are usual. How do we evaluate it? Well, again, we go in and we look at the records, all of those records we just looked at back here. We basically go, okay, so here's their policy. It's supposed to be encrypted and then locked in a box and then taken across town here. And was that done? All right, so that's sort of the idea there. And then removable media. What is our, let's control the use of removable media. All right, so what is accessible here? So as far as the, we want to see the policy, we want to figure out what the procedures are. So I used to, when I was going to the college initially, I was a network administrator and an engineer for a research facility here on the UW campus, and so their procedure for preventing removable media was to actually take epoxy and squirt it in the USB ports. So, I suppose that the procedures addressing media usage varies from, place to place. But that's one thing they can do. Other places could disconnect the USB or remove the drivers. So there's different, there's different ways of actually handling this depending on what they're trying to do. But again, the way we can tell it is we want to see what look at the documentation for how that's being set up. As far as interviews, we want to find people who have system media use responsibilities. The information security people are going to be able to see if removable media is being plugged into and out of the machines, and the administrators are going to know the configs, the setups. So all three of these are really useful for this particular thing. So how can you test? Well, number one, you can check the documentation. The other thing, you can take a sample machine and you can try to plug a USB drive into it and see what happens. Does it work? So it's pretty easy to test if the mechanisms are in place or are effective in this or not. All right. So what about shared media? All right. So we want to determine if the use of a portable storage device is prohibited when the device have no identifiable owner. All right. So in other words, I don't want somebody picking up a USB drive and jamming it into one of the slots at work. The old throwing the USB drive down in the parking lot that has malware on it ploy. So again, we want to see what the policy is, and what do people do with that kind of situation? Should they submit that to security or something like that to check out what's going on? That sort of thing. This is just to keep ridiculous. I mean, this is just something ridiculous that shouldn't happen, but you want to make sure that they've got some type of policy in place to make, to make sure this doesn't happen. All right. Are the system configuration settings set up to disallow this, which in theory, I would hope they would be. There's people we talk to again. How do we evaluate it? Again, you can kind of just test and see if you can plug a rogue device in. All right. What I would probably be looking for from an auditor standpoint is I would probably be looking for a record of tests where they are actually checking whether or not they can plug rogue devices into those things. All right. So just from an auditor perspective, I think that's what we'd be looking for. All right. And of course, protect our backups. The goal here is to make sure that accessing those devices is prohibited unless there's no identifiable owner. Wait, what is this? How did we get here? This is not what we're looking for. Yeah, okay. I think something went wrong there. Protecting backups, though, we're winging this one. So our audit objective is basically to maintain the confidentiality and integrity of the backups. All right. So how do we do this? Well, number one, we need to have physical access security. So we're going to probably, lock them in a box before they're transported or something like that. Wherever they're transported to or stored at, we're going to have locked down and secured. And we may or may not, actually have the drive itself backed up or encrypted rather, so that nobody can access it. All right. What would be some acceptable evidence of that kind of thing? Well, number one, we're gonna have the policy and the policy in place that's going to say, the backup, a backup is going to go into a locked box. Or it's going to be encrypted as it's being made. All of this kind of stuff. And then we're going to have the procedures that'll show the step-by-step procedures that should be used, for this. Now, we should be able to take the procedures and go, okay, you know what? This procedure will accomplish what this policy defines. And then, of course, we're going to want to see evidence where they actually tested and made sure that the procedure was effective in doing what it was supposed to. All right, that they were able to secure the backups. All right, and evaluating tests, of course, same way. I mean, we can literally, we want to see a record of the fact that they are checking that those backups are non-accessible. All right, so that is basically the data. There we go. So that is the media protection section. All right, any questions on that one? All right. Okay, well, that is all I have on this.